What is up, Lighthouse students? How you guys doing? Hope you guys are having a fantastic Wednesday, wherever you are. I'm glad you're there. Hope you're having a great time with your group. A couple of announcements for you guys before we get into our lesson for tonight. First up, we have got our Splash Bash coming up. This is our end of the year party. We're closing out the semester with a whole lot of fun, a whole lot of water, and maybe we'll get a little bit messy too. So this will be May 17th from 6 to 8. So we'll provide dinner, and then we'll play a bunch of fun games together. Make sure to wear some clothes so you don't mind if they get dirty or wet or any of that sort of stuff, because it's all coming. So this will be our last kind of regular event for the school year before we switch over into our summer schedule. And we still meet during the summer, but we just meet a little bit less, a little bit more. We do some fun things, and then we do some kind of regular youth group stuff. And obviously you guys have vacation and you're busier in the summer, so we kind of pull things back and then we kick back into it in the fall. But one of the things that we are hoping to do this summer is our day camps, which we had done last year. I'm working on picking out a date and getting the schedule all set together, and that's going to be an awesome time. But one of the things that I did at those day camps is I tried to answer some questions that I heard you guys ask throughout the year. So we talked about our pets a little bit, and we talked about the Bible and why we can trust it and how we should read it, and we talked about a tool that we can use when we pray, which are just some questions and some things that I had heard from you guys throughout all of last year. So this year, I'd like to do that again. So this little QR code, I'm actually going to have it throughout most of the rest of the video. So you can ask me any sort of questions that you have about God, about the Bible, about relationships. Would love to do what I can to answer some of those things from a biblical, from a Christian worldview. Specifically at those day camps, maybe a little bit this summer and next year as well. So that QR code, like I said, it's going to be throughout the rest of this video and probably the next couple videos as you kind of have questions. I'd love to answer them. So that's that. So you see here at the bottom, that's the QR code, and it'll be there throughout the rest of the video. But we are back in our series called Please Explain, where we're talking about some things that are a little hard for us to understand. And then part of that includes riddles. So here is our riddle of the week. We got one of these each week. Here it is. Sometimes it's silver, but also gold. Printed on paper, it's a treasure to hold. What is it? What might this be? This is a fun little riddle or brain tease. I'm going to show you the answer in 3, 2, 1. Money. Currency. Currency is kind of a fancy term for money. Currency or money is the correct answer. Okay, now that we've spent a little second here and we've warmed up our brains with that little riddle, I want us to imagine with me for a second, all right, that tryouts for the basketball team are happening, okay? You have spent weeks at the gym practicing your jump shot, working on your ball handling skills, trying to get as good and prepared as you can for tryouts. And then the day of tryouts comes and you realize the coach has actually already picked who's going to be on what team before the tryouts even happened. Okay, here's another scenario. I want you to picture with me, okay? So the school play is coming up, right? And you have spent weeks working on your audition. You've picked out a piece that you've memorized, and you've been working on all these characters and all these voices, trying to get as prepared for your audition as you can be. And you realize, as you show up for your audition, that the entire cast has already been picked before the auditions happened. Okay, one final scenario I want you to imagine with me, all right? So you've been studying really, really hard for an upcoming English test, okay? You've memorized all sorts of vocabulary words. You've written a bunch of practice essays. You've been working really hard, and then you go in and you ace the test, okay? You're feeling great, and then after you've aced the test, the teacher comes back and says, hey, it doesn't matter how anyone did on that test. Everyone's going to get an A regardless of how they did. So I imagine that one or probably all three of those scenarios would feel pretty crappy, right? Maybe even a little bit unfair. And when you or your friend are treated unfairly, what emotions do you feel? What sensations do you feel in your body, and where do you feel them? And what do you tend to do, or what do you really want to do? Okay, so we're going to take 30 seconds here. I want you to kind of answer these questions with your group. Ready, set, go.
I've been messed up, stressed out with no luck. But every time I wake up, I get a chance to wake up. Thank God I got a chance to wake up. Wake up, another day that get my cake up. Cake up, cause every time I wake up, I get a chance to wake up. Wake up, wake up. Wake up, little slick, get up out of bed.
So when we or someone that we love is treated unfairly, all of those responses that you guys just said, they're totally reasonable, right? Sometimes we really do get treated unfairly. And we live in a world that unfortunately just categorizes people. We tear down some and we praise others. And because of that, we can sometimes feel like we've been treated unfairly when we feel overshadowed by others' success and worry that maybe we're not good enough. When we see what other people are up to on social media and decide that our lives aren't happy or interesting. When we look around and feel like everyone else is really thriving in areas where we feel like we are lacking. And comparing ourselves with others often leaves us feeling like life isn't fair or we're not getting what we deserve. But sometimes the thing that we call unfair might actually be something else entirely. So let me explain. We talked last week about how Jesus spoke a lot in story form, and he did that in part because stories are powerful things. When he was here on earth, he often used stories, which we call parables, to communicate complicated or maybe hard to hear truths. So, have you ever felt frustrated when comparing yourself with others? Have you ever felt like an outsider who didn't belong? Have you ever felt like you weren't getting the recognition or the reward that you deserved? Have you ever felt mistreated, overlooked, or cheated? And if you have, there's a story that Jesus wants you to hear. And as you listen to this story, I want you to take your sheets. Your leader should have handed them out. Hopefully you've got one that's got your name on the top. If not, write your name on the top. There's 4 sheets, one for each week. So if we're on week 2, so go ahead and flip over to the second one. And it's the same 3 questions from last week. I want you to write these down. I'm going to read the parable, and then I'll give you about a minute to fill this out, and then you can use it as a discussion tool when we switch over to small groups. Okay? So those 3 questions are, what do you think the parable is about? What's confusing about the parable? And what do you think the spiritual lesson in this story might be? Okay, so we're on page 611, Matthew chapter 20. Jesus said, "For the kingdom of heaven is like the landowner who went out early one morning to hire workers for his vineyard. He agreed to pay the normal daily wage and sent them out to work. At 9 o'clock in the morning, he was passing through the marketplace and saw some people standing around doing nothing. So he hired them, telling them he would pay them whatever was right at the end of the day. So they went to work in the vineyard. At noon, and again at 3 o'clock, he did the same thing. At 5 o'clock that afternoon, he was in town again and saw more people standing around, and he asked them, 'Why haven't you been working today?' They replied, 'Because no one has hired us.' And the landowner told them, 'Then go out and join the others who are in my vineyard.' That evening, he told the foreman to call the workers in and pay them, beginning with the last workers first. When those hired at 5 o'clock were paid, each received a full day's wage. When those hired first came to get their pay, they assumed they would receive more, but they too were paid a day's wage. When they received their pay, they protested to the owner, 'Those people worked only an hour, and yet you paid them just as much as you paid us, who worked all day in the scorching heat.' And he answered one of them, 'Friend, I haven't been unfair. Didn't you agree to work all day for the usual wage? Take your money and go. I wanted to pay this last worker the same as you. Is it against the law for me to do what I want with my money? Should you be jealous because I am kind to others? So those who are last now will be first then, and those who are first will be last.'" So take a minute. If you haven't filled out your card, go ahead and do that.
can change who we are. There's nothing better than to know we belong. We've been adopted by the Father of love. Our brother suffered on the cross.
So, maybe you're wondering why Jesus told the story about some people working in a field. At the end of the workday, these workers all got paid the same amount of money, even though some people didn't have to work as long as others. And maybe that doesn't seem fair at first, but with this fictitious story, Jesus is trying to make a point. Have you ever been part of a team where things were hyper competitive? Or maybe your family has broken some tables, flipped some chairs over contested games of Monopoly. At the time that Jesus told this parable, people were in competition with each other too. Some people, they wanted to prove that they were holy and more worthy than their neighbor. And some wanted public recognition for how holy, religious, and generous that they were. And so when Jesus spoke to this crowd, he was aware some people listening saw themselves as more worthy of God's love than others. And with this story, Jesus presented a different version of how God works, what God values, and what God's kingdom would be like. In God's kingdom, Jesus was saying people who are placed last will actually be first. And if the last will be first feels unfair to you, keep listening, okay? Jesus was saying that in this world, powerful people are accustomed to being first, often at the expense of people who are less powerful. Wealthy people often win at the expense of the less fortunate. Popular or influential people often win at the expense of people who get overlooked. Bullies often win at the expense of the people that they hurt. Strong people often win at the expense of people who are weaker. But in God's kingdom, Jesus was saying everything is flipped upside down. In God's kingdom, God intentionally makes room for people that the world overlooks. The powerless, the poor, the outcasts, the hurting, and the weak, they are all invited into God's kingdom by trusting in Jesus. Imagine the workers who showed up toward the end of the day. The people who had been there all day might have been thinking, these people don't deserve the same treatment. They just got here. They assumed that those people were probably lazy, undeserving, or somehow trying to cheat them out of what was theirs. But in this story, the man in charge saw something different. He saw that these people had waited all day to find work to feed their families. No one had invited them, chosen them, given them a chance, so they were going empty-handed. But then, at the last moment, in the late hour of the day, this man gave them the chance to work. Not only that, he paid them a full day's wage. Think of the relief that they would have felt to be receiving such an invitation. And the story isn't about money or hard work, really. It's actually about God's love and grace and who gets to belong in God's kingdom. Jesus was saying God's love isn't just for the people who got there first or who followed all the right rules. God's love is for everyone. And that's not something to be angry or upset about. It's something to celebrate. And in God's kingdom, it's not our actions or status that make us worthy. It's God's free gift of love and grace that came through Jesus dying on the cross in our place. And that gift is offered to everyone, even people that we think shouldn't deserve it. Because in reality, none of us deserve it. None of us are good enough. None of us could have worked hard enough to receive God's love and grace. But in God's kingdom, everyone is invited to experience his love, because in God's kingdom, everyone belongs. And so we've used the word grace a few times today, but we haven't necessarily defined it. And it's a word that we hear a lot in the Bible and at church, right? So what does it mean? And when we talk about God's grace, we're talking about God giving us a gift that we didn't earn or deserve. And in the story we heard today, everyone received grace. The people who had been working all day received a paycheck that was really generous. They were paid more than they deserved for their work. That is gracious. And the people who showed up late and received that same big paycheck were also given grace, just like the first group, but to an even greater degree. The first group hadn't been cheated or robbed or tricked, and they instead should have been celebrating the gift of grace that they had all received together. But of course, in this story, they chose a different sort of response instead. And have you ever heard the term of gatekeeper before? You might have heard that. In literal terms, a gatekeeper is someone who guards a gate to make sure that no one gets through who shouldn't. But in metaphorical terms, and we know that Jesus loved speaking in metaphor and in story, right? A gatekeeper can also be someone who just tries to decide who's in and who's out, who's valuable and who's not. As followers of Jesus, sometimes we make the mistake of thinking that we need to be God's gatekeepers. We think it's our job to decide who's in and who's out, who's deserving of God's love and who's not. And that's the mistake that many religious people were making during Jesus' time too. But Jesus once said that he is the gate. He's how we get access to God's love and grace. So if Jesus is the gate, does he really need us to protect him? Does he need us telling him who to let in and out? I don't think so. If you've experienced God's love and grace, your job isn't to try to keep anyone out of God's kingdom. It's the total opposite. It's to invite more people inside. So, in God's kingdom, how can we be someone who invites instead of gatekeeps? Here are a few ways. The first is that we need to receive God's grace for ourselves. There's nothing that you could have done to earn the love and grace that God has for you. You just have to receive the gift that's already been given to you by God, and He's more generous than we could have ever imagined. And if you're feeling right now that tug on your heart and you haven't ever trusted in Jesus to save you, I'd encourage you right now to repent of your sin, trust in Jesus, and declare Him Lord of your life. And make sure you tell your leaders so that they can celebrate with you. Next, we want to celebrate God's grace for others. When God's love and grace reaches someone else, especially someone who we don't think really deserves it, ask God to help you to celebrate that. Ask God to change your heart until it's full of joy for anyone who discovers that they can belong in the kingdom of God. And then finally, we can share God's grace with others. If you've found belonging in Jesus, don't keep it to yourself. Share God's love and grace with others. You can do it by telling people about the grace that you found through Jesus, through His work on the cross and in the resurrection. And you can do it by extending God's grace to others, even when it's difficult. We can live God's love when we give whatever we can. Maybe it's a smile, maybe it's an act of kindness, maybe an encouraging word, maybe treating others with respect and compassion, maybe offering forgiveness, right? And whether you identify with those who worked the longer hours and think it's unfair that others join in for the same reward, or maybe you identify with those who worked in that last hour, you are welcome in God's kingdom, and you are welcome to invite others in too. And Jesus, of course, came to show us what God's kingdom is really like. It's not a kingdom with an exclusive guest list. In God's kingdom, everyone is invited, all of those who have put their faith and their trust in Jesus. It's not a kingdom that shows favoritism to the powerful, or to the wealthy, to the popular, or to the strong. In God's kingdom, everyone is cared for. And it's not a kingdom that categorizes people based on their worthiness, because in God's kingdom, everyone belongs, even you and me. All right. That's what I've got for you guys this evening. We're going to switch it over to small groups. Again, remember to use some of the notes that you took to help with your discussion. And the Splash Bash coming up May 17th. I want to see you there. It's going to be awesome. And again, I'll continue to have this little QR code. So scan it. Send me your questions. Love to answer them. Love you guys. I'll see you when I see ya.